You know, that moment when you realize you've been driving for 20 minutes and can't remember a single thing about your journey. Your hands moved the wheel and your foot hit the brake and you navigated traffic, but somewhere along the way, you kind of disappeared. Really? You became a passenger in your own life. Well, this isn't about driving that I'm talking about today, but most of us spend our entire decades this way, reacting instead of responding, being lived by life rather than instead of just living it. What if I told you that the most radical teaching ever given about breaking free from this mechanical existence was delivered 2,000 years ago on a hillside, and it's been systemically buried by the very people who claim to follow it? I'm Mark Roach. Welcome to Transcendent, my platform to help you be authentic, and if you like, to find your uniqueness and your essence. Now beware, my perspective may be uncomfortable. It was formed from a twisted journey around the world, crossing a wide spectrum of experiences. But it began in modest surroundings. It began from a humble beginning and raised in the Ozarks by hardworking parents and grandparents with a touch of Native American Indian, coupled with a deep, heartfelt view of our fellow man. Yes, I was an aspiring youth. I had highs and lows, as most would define them. This channel is all about inspiring common people to find their power and place their uniqueness in their lives. My life's been a research lab. I've studied mystics and healers, started a couple of oil companies, walked away from a path to the NFL when I realized I couldn't conform to a materialistic and violent lifestyle. I've raised 8 kids. I've also raised over $1 billion for startups. Been in the middle of $10 billion of transactions and led 5 to 10,000 professionals in one way or another in geology and engineering, business. I've been mentored in business and athletes and athletics by rich and famous people you'd probably recognize, may idolize. Now, here I'm hoping to ease the way for my fellow man, for others who may deal with complex PTSD or have a calling to pursue their uniqueness or their art or something deeper in their life. Or maybe you've got a friend that you're trying to understand or a loved one that's operating from such a place. Now, the Sermon on the Mount represents everything that institutional Christianity fears most. Think about it. Jesus sat on a hillside and told people to stop worrying about material security and to turn the other cheek when attacked, to love their enemies, and to seek first the kingdom of heaven rather than earthly success. He essentially told them to live from an inner source of strength and meaning rather than depending on external validation, rules, or authorities. The teaching, or this teaching, is absolutely toxic to anyone trying to build a religious empire. It can't be monetized. It can't be controlled. It can't be used to create dependency or fear. When Jesus said, "Take no thought for your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, is not the life more than the meat and the body than raiment?" Well, he was pointing toward a way of being that makes religious middlemen irrelevant. No wonder the modern pushers of Christianity have buried these teachings under layers of moral obligation, judgment of others, and material prosperity doctrines. The Sermon on the Mount offers no comfort to egos seeking power or institutions demanding compliance. It speaks only to the part of you that's capable of inner transformation, the part that can find meaning and security from within rather than from needing to be told what to think by external authorities. This is why the teaching remains as radical now as it was 2,000 years ago. It calls for people to wake up from mechanical living, to stop being robots following programming, and to discover their own source of consciousness that exists within every human being. Now, this message threatens every system built on keeping people dependent, fearful, and externally focused. The spiritual teacher George Gurdjieff understood this perfectly. He spent his life studying the mechanics of human consciousness and discovered that most people live under what he called the law of accident. That doesn't mean they're unlucky. It means they're unconscious. It means they react to whatever happens to them rather than creating what happens through them. Gurdjieff's student, Ouspensky, described it perfectly when he said that man is a machine and all his actions, words, thoughts, feelings, convictions, opinions, habits, and moods are the result of external influences and accidental causes. Sound familiar? Well, this is exactly the mechanical state that Jesus was addressing in his teaching. Most people live their entire life this way, buffeted by circumstances, driven by habits, and they never consciously choose, reacting to triggers they don't even recognize. Think about your last argument. Did you choose to get angry, or did anger happen to you? When you scrolled through social media for 2 hours instead of working on something meaningful, was that conscious decision of yours, or did you just get pulled in to a machine? Well, Maurice Nicol, another student of Gurdjieff, put it perfectly. So long as man derives meaning solely from the incidents of his outer life, he remains under the law of accident. He remains in the events of his life by chance, the luck of the draw. When something good happens, well, it's luck. When something bad happens, it's bad luck or evil. But if a man works inwardly, seeking meaning from within, something else is possible. This is exactly what Jesus was pointing toward when he said, "But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." The kingdom of God isn't a place you go when you die or a reward for following religious rules. It's a state of consciousness you can access right now. It's the experience of inner unity, of being aligned with something larger than your personality's immediate desires. But here's what makes this teaching so threatening to religious authorities. When you seek first, when you prioritize consciousness over comfort, when you no longer need external validation or permission to live authentically, you develop what Gurdjieff called a magnetic center, an inner compass that helps you coordinate all your different impulses toward a unified direction based on your deeper values rather than on social expectations. This is where Gurdjieff's concept of the law of fate comes into play. Ouspensky wrote that only through conscious work does a man pass beyond the law of accident and coming closer to fate. Fate begins to operate when a man ceases to be fully mechanical and begins to act from his essence. Notice the word essence. This isn't about following someone else's moral code or religious system. It's about discovering and expressing your authentic nature, your genuine preferences, your real values and aspirations. Most people live entirely from what Gurdjieff called personality, the false self, shaped by circumstance, conditioning, and social expectations. It's the collection of masks we wear to get approval, to avoid conflict, or maintain our self-image. Jesus understood this distinction perfectly when he spoke about being born again. He wasn't talking about a religious conversion experience or joining a church. He was describing the awakening of essence, the activation of your real self that's been buried under layers of conditioning and mechanical living. The practical work begins with what both Jesus and Gurdjieff emphasized, self-observation. Jesus said, "What do you see, or why do you see the speck in your brother's eye but don't notice the log in your own eye?" This isn't moral instruction as much as it's practical psychology. Until you can see your own mechanical patterns clearly, you remain at the mercy of them. So start noticing your automatic reactions. When someone cuts you off in traffic, observe the anger that arises and how it arises, the things that you say, feel, do. Don't try to suppress it and don't try to act it out. Just watch it, observe it. When you feel anxious about money or relationships, observe the anxiety without immediately trying to fix whatever it is that is pulling at you. And don't try to explain it away. When you catch yourself judging someone else, pause and look for that exact same quality or feeling or judgment, considerations about yourself, about who you are, maybe something that you haven't accepted about yourself yet. Now, Gurdjieff taught his students to work with what he called the little I's, those different voices and impulses that arise throughout the day. There's the I that wants to eat healthy food, and there's the I that wants ice cream. Well, there's an I that wants to be productive, and there's an I that wants to scroll social media, be passive. And there's the I that wants to be kind, and there's the one that wants to judge. Now, instead of identifying completely with any one of these I's, you learn to observe them all from a more neutral place. Now, this creates space between you and your automatic responses. That space gives you the chance to see the choice, and those choices become possible. You can respond consciously rather than react mechanically. This is what Jesus meant when he said, let your communication be yes, yes, no, no. For whatever is more than these comes of evil. Now he's talking about the integrity of being and about how words and actions that arise from consciousness rather than reactivity. When you say yes, yes, that means yes. When you say no, mean no. Don't add manipulation. Don't hedge your bets. Don't speak from shifting sands of mood and circumstance. But notice how differently this is from the obligation-based rules of following some version of Christianity that's been sold to the masses. Jesus isn't giving you a list of behaviors to follow. He's pointing you toward an inner source of authority that makes external rules unnecessary. When you're aligned with consciousness, your essence flows and right action flows naturally. This isn't this is exactly what Nicol meant when he wrote, if people realize how little real will that they possess, how often they're merely reacting to their surroundings, they would desire to become or do the work to become whole, to develop a center of gravity within themselves that's not moved by outer events. The institutional version of Christianity keeps people dependent on external authority by convincing them they're inherently flawed and need constant guidance from religious professionals. But Jesus taught the opposite. He said, the kingdom of heaven is within you, and he called people to discover their own direct connection to the divine, not through intermediaries or institutions. When Jesus taught about turning the other cheek, he wasn't promoting passivity or dormant or doormat behavior. He was describing what happens when you're not controlled by automatic reactions to perceived slights or attacks. When someone says something that triggers anger or hurt, instead of immediately striking back, you pause. You feel the reaction without being pressed by it. or possessed by it. You choose your response from consciousness rather than reactivity. This is incredibly practical. Most relationship conflicts happen because people are reacting to their interpretation of what the other person meant rather than responding to what actually happened. Most business failures happen because decisions are made from fear or greed rather than a clear assessment of reality. Most personal suffering happens because we resist what's actually occurring in favor of what we think should be happening. The transition from the law of accident to the law of fate doesn't eliminate challenges or guarantee external success in the world, in the material world. What it does is free you from being jerked around by circumstances. Your inner state becomes more stable, regardless of outer conditions. You develop inner authority that doesn't depend on external validation or approval. The inner stability allows you to make better decisions because you're not coming from desperation or compulsion. You can see situations more clearly because you're not projecting your unresolved emotions onto them. You can respond more appropriately because you're in touch with your genuine feelings and values rather than just reacting from old patterns. Jesus demonstrated this kind of consciousness through his teaching and his life. When threatened by authorities, he didn't react with fear or aggression. He faced the criticism and he didn't get defensive. When encountering human suffering, he responded with compassion rather than being overwhelmed by emotion. He had developed what we might call emotional sovereignty, which is the ability to feel deeply without being controlled by feelings. This is why his teaching was so threatening to the religious establishment of his time. It continues, and well, even today, it continues to threaten religious empires. A person operating from inner authority doesn't need external controllers. They can't be manipulated through fear, guilt, or promises of future rewards. They're dangerous to any system built on keeping people dependent and unconscious. Nicol observed that as one is able to derive meaning from within, circumstances begin to shape themselves in unexpected ways. The universe seems to help those who help themselves, not by mere accident, but by resonance with inner truth. This isn't magic or wishful thinking. It's what happens when you align with deeper currents of existence. Jesus expressed this when he said, "Ask and it shall be given you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you." Each of those verbs requires conscious action, deliberate choice, sustained effort. But notice he's not telling you to ask church authorities or religious professionals. He's pointing you toward direct engagement with the source of consciousness itself. I've experienced this transition in my own life. When I walked away from the NFL, I was choosing essence over personality. My personality may have wanted status at one point, the money, the recognition, but my essence knew the path that would require me to betray fundamental values that I held over violence and materialism. The choice to follow essence led to uncertainty, financial difficulty, but it also opened doors that I never could have imagined. When I've started companies or raised money for others, the most successful outcomes have always happened when I was aligned with something deeper than personal gain. When I was trying to solve real problems or help people in meaningful ways, resources and support appeared almost miraculously. When I was operating from ego or fear, everything became a struggle. This isn't about becoming passive or just wanting to wait around for good things to happen. The law of fate requires tremendous activity, but it's conscious activity rather than mechanical busyness. You're working with deeper forces rather than against them. You're aligned with what Jesus called the will of the Father, which isn't some external deity, but the deeper intelligence that flows through consciousness when it's not blocked by personality and mechanical reactions. The practical work of moving from accident to fate involves what Nicol called repeated self-observation, seeing oneself as a series of, of small mechanical reactions that man may begin to allow a genuine I to emerge, the beginning of his essence, the birth of real will. This connects directly to Jesus' teaching about those that are pure in heart. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Purity of heart isn't about moral perfection or following religious rules. It's about single-mindedness, about inner unity, about aligning all parts of yourself toward consciousness rather than having different parts of you pulling in different directions. When you live under the law of accident, you're fragmented. Parts of you want to exercise, another part wants to stay in bed. Part of you wants to be kind, another part wants to judge. Another part wants to grow, another part wants to stay safe. These different parts fight with each other, and you end up paralyzed or torn in multiple directions. But under the law of fate, you begin to develop unity of being. You start making choices based on your deeper values rather than your momentary impulses. This doesn't mean that you never feel conflicted, but you have a center of gravity that helps you navigate through conflicts toward authentic action. The difference between luck and destiny becomes clear in this process. Luck is random. Destiny is what happens when the inner work creates resonance with the larger patterns of meaning and purpose in your life. Strange synchronicities begin to occur. People show up in your life who can help with exactly what you're working on. Opportunities appear that seem perfectly timed. Resources become available just when you need them. But here's what's crucial to understand. You can't fake this. You can't manipulate your way into the law of fate through positive thinking or visualization techniques. The transition happens through genuine inner work, sincerity, humility, through honest self-observation, through the willingness to see yourself clearly, even when it's uncomfortable. And this is where the teaching becomes challenging. It requires you to give up the comfortable illusion that your problems are caused by external circumstances or other people. It asks you to take responsibility for your inner state, regardless of what's happening around you. It demands you stop being a victim in your own mechanical reactions. Jesus captured this perfectly when he said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." And he's not saying the spiritual path is without effort. He's saying that when you align with truth, with love, with consciousness, the effort flows naturally rather than fighting against the current of your own being. The work involves learning to feel emotions fully without being possessed by them. When anger arises, you don't suppress it or act it out automatically. You feel it completely while observing it from a more neutral place. This creates space for conscious choice. You might still take strong action, but it comes from clarity rather than reactivity. The same applies to fear, sadness, excitement, or any other emotional state. Emotions become information rather than commands. They tell you what's important, what needs attention, what values are being challenged or honored, but they don't control your behavior unless you're unconscious. This is the ultimate goal of the work we're discussing, not to become emotionless or detached, but to develop genuine responsiveness instead of automatic reactivity, to feel fully without being possessed by feelings, to think clearly without being trapped by thoughts, to act from consciousness rather than compulsion. Jesus pointed beyond even the law of fate when he said, "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." This isn't about moral perfectionism or impossible standards. It's about complete integration. It's about wholeness, about the realization of human potential. It's about becoming so aligned with consciousness that there's no separation between who you are and what you do. This might sound impossibly idealistic, but it's actually the most practical thing imaginable. The more conscious you become, the more effective you are in every area of life. Relationships improve because you're not constantly projecting and reacting. Work becomes more fulfilling because you're aligned with deeper purpose. Health improves because you're not constantly fighting internal conflicts. The path from the law of accident to the law of fate is available to anyone willing to do the work, and it doesn't require special talent, circumstances, or religious affiliation. It requires the willingness to observe yourself honestly, the commitment to choose consciousness over comfort moment by moment. Every time you pause before reacting, you're moving towards fate. Every time that you feel an emotion fully without being possessed by it, you're developing essence. Every time you act from your deeper values rather than your immediate impulses, you're aligning with larger patterns of meaning and purpose. This is the invitation Jesus extended 2,000 years ago, and that teachers like Gurdjieff renewed in more recent times. Wake up, stop sleepwalking through your life. Take responsibility for your inner state. Develop the consciousness that allows you to respond rather than react, to create rather than just consume, to love rather than just need. The world desperately needs people who live this way. This is a time of increasing reactivity and mechanical behavior. Conscious human beings become beacons of possibility. By doing your own inner work, you're contributing to the healing of the collective unconscious that drives so much suffering in our world. But remember, this work threatens every system built on keeping people dependent and unconscious. Don't expect support from institutions that profit from human confusion and mechanical living. The path of consciousness is often a lonely one, at least initially. But as you develop inner authority and alignment with your essence, you'll find others who are doing the same work. Every step you take on this path makes you more free, more authentic, more genuinely yourself. And every person who makes this journey makes it easier for others to follow. This is how transformation happens, not through force or manipulation, but through the patient, persistent work of conscious awakening to itself. The Sermon on the Mount remains the most radical teaching ever given about human potential and inner freedom. 2,000 years later, it still threatens every system built on control, fear, and external authority. By understanding its connection to the laws governing human consciousness, you can begin the practical work of moving from mechanical reaction to conscious response, from being a victim of circumstances to being your own creator of your own experience. So I invite you to begin this work if you haven't already, or to deepen it if you already have. Start with simple observations. Notice your automatic reactions, feel your emotions without being controlled by them. Make choices from your deeper values rather than your surface impulses. Seek meaning within yourself rather than depending on solely external circumstances. The transition from accident to fate is the most ancient and the most modern spiritual practice that there is. It's what every wisdom tradition is pointed toward in its own language. It's the work of becoming fully human, of realizing the potential that exists within consciousness itself. I'm Mark Roach. This is Transcendent, wishing you all the best.